Welcome back to the slaughter, everybody. Welcome back to Killing Floor, where today we're going to be talking about Killing Floor 3 getting delayed, and kind of what that means for Killing Floor 3, and I overall think that this is probably a good idea, as well as it seems like a lot of people think that this is a good idea, because the Killing Floor 3 beta came out a couple of weeks ago, didn't get very good reception overall from really anybody. I had very mixed feelings about it, a lot of people had some really negative feelings about it, and there was a lot of problems with it just overall. So let's talk about this and sort of what they're going to be changing, at least that they've said, and, well, we kind of have to speculate on a date as to when this is actually going to be coming out. Since they said it's not going to be coming out this month of March, since it was set for March 25th of 2025, but now it just has a date of 2025, so sometime later in the year. So the very first thing that they're actually going to be changing, which they said, is that there is not going to be a specialist system in the game, and it will just revert back to the old perk system that was in Killing Floor 1 and Killing Floor 2, where you could play any character you'd like and then just pick whatever perk you wanted, which nobody wanted specialists in the first place. Like, that was said right away as soon as this was announced, that we were going to be getting specialists, because if you have characters that you really like, then you'll probably just keep playing them over just picking whatever characters there are. So yeah, this one will at least allow people to pick whichever characters they like, as well as one point that got brought up a little bit that I didn't really understand was like them wanting to have specialists to sell more skins, but I feel like that would be the opposite, or that would give you the opposite effect of that, since you think people would just pick the skins that they really like, especially for characters that they like, and they'd be more willing to buy those skins if they could play it on absolutely everybody. Because maybe somebody like Firebug comes out with a really cool skin, but you don't really play Firebug. You don't really like playing Firebug. So even if the skin is really cool, you probably wouldn't really buy it because there's not really a reason to. As opposed to if, let's say, Mr. Foster got a really cool skin and you like Mr. Foster a lot, you're probably just going to play Mr. Foster a lot. You're probably going to get that skin. At least that's what I would think. So even from a marketing perspective, I don't know why they did that. So that is probably the biggest complaint that people had, and it's good that that's being changed. I really see no reason as to why they wanted to have specialists in here, and even their own reasoning was bizarre when I read it, saying that it would be easier to tell who was on your team because they were put to like a specific person for that role. But again, if they have a bunch of skins like they did in Killing Floor 2, it was sometimes really difficult to tell who was actually on your team, because Strasser doesn't always look like Strasser. Foster, well, kind of looks like Foster, but you could get it mixed up with Mrs. Foster as well, at least from a distance, and same goes with just about everybody else. If they're all wearing masks and have all sorts of different outfits, it's really hard to tell. It's just a lot easier if you just put the icon above their head and let them be whichever one they want. So that one is definitely a welcomed improvement over what they had in Killing Floor 3. There were some other problems, let's talk about those and potentially how they could fix them. First up would be weapons. The weapons did not really look all that good in Killing Floor 3. With few exceptions, there were a couple of them that were fine, like some of the revolvers, like Sharpshooter's revolver was actually really good, as well as pretty much all of Ninja's weapons looked good, or at least decent, because they looked like what they were supposed to. Most of the other weapons looked really janky though. As to whether or not they could remodel all of these, I think that you could, especially if you already have a base model that looks decent or if it's already based off of a real gun. I think you could make things that just kind of work better there, although you would still need to do animations for that, so I imagine that would be a huge overhaul. I'm not really sure if they're going to be changing the weapons all that much because of those reasons. Another option that they could potentially do instead of that is simply port the weapons and animations from like Killing Floor 2, at least if they're somewhat compatible. I don't know if that would be a viable thing given the engine differences, but I mean, the weapon they already have modeled for Killing Floor 2, and most of them look pretty decent, as well as even in Killing Floor 2 we had some of the futuristic weapons that didn't really look that bad. Most of the HRG weapons kind of had that futuristic look on the weapons themselves, even though they were kind of just copy and pasted from already existing weapons in Killing Floor 2. Still, I think people would be a lot more open to that than the kind of weird sci-fi weapons that we ended up getting in this beta. So yeah, weapons could definitely be changed. I don't know if that's really going to change though, because I feel like that would be a major overhaul to the game, but it would be a nice improvement. Sound effects on the weapons I think could be a whole lot better too. I felt like most of the weapons just didn't have that great of sounds on them. They sounded kind of weak. The next one would be animations and movement. The overall movement I think is actually pretty good in the game. Actually moving around, running around, sliding, jumping, all that felt pretty decent in the game. That did feel pretty good. But the animations were rough and sometimes stilted at times, where sometimes you would just go to climb up something and there would be these weird choppy frames in there where it just wouldn't really look quite right, and I chalk that up somewhat to the beta. Maybe it would look better in the final one. Hopefully it will now, and I hope they release another beta before this one goes live so that they could potentially get more feedback on it. The overall movement and animations looked okay, and I think they could build off of that. With the exception of like the executions, those ones seemed weird in the game. Not necessarily because the executions looked bad, I think they looked okay, but it just felt really weird to have the executions in the game for most of the characters anyway. I don't know how often that would actually come up in multiplayer, but even so, it feels very awkward to throw it into the game. I feel like if you're going to do the executions, maybe make it so only Ninja can actually do the executions. Like, that's just another bonus to their class, because it kind of makes sense for Ninja to be able to, you know, jump forward and potentially execute somebody and have iframes. That feels like something that the class would sort of have, as opposed to, like, Commando running up and stabbing stuff and getting iframes, and it just feels kind of awkward in those other classes where you don't have high mobility to do it. So I feel like maybe just isolate it to that one class or something. At least then it would still stay like somewhat thematic if you didn't want to get rid of executions entirely. But overall, it feels kind of weird when you get like grabbed by a clot and then you go in to stab them, and you pretty much have iframes the whole time when you're doing it, so nothing can hit you, and then your teammates can just clear off everything from you. So normally in the other Killing Floor games, if you got grabbed, that was usually quite bad, and teammates needed to save you. In this case, it would actually be quite good, because teammates could still potentially save you, but you were basically invulnerable while this happened. So yeah, I think that could be changed quite a bit too. Up next would be characters. Characters were complained about a decent amount in this too, and I do kind of understand that, because a lot of the characters did seem to have kind of blandish voice lines, and in like Killing Floor 2 we had a lot more vibrant cast of characters. So I think that would be kind of cool to add more characters like that and give them better voice lines, because most of them in Killing Floor 3 I don't think were terrible, it's just they weren't very memorable when I was playing. It's like, yeah, the ninja guy's pretty cool, and like I like Mr. Foster, but I like Foster in all of them, so that's not really too surprising, and the others were just sort of whatever. And that's not to say like Killing Floor 2, all of the voice actors and all of the voices and characters and everything were amazing. Plenty of them were just kind of okay, but there was some standouts, so more standout characters in the roster would be kind of cool. You could always add that as more characters, which would be really easy to do, since if you're doing away with the specialist system, you don't need to worry about that. And speaking about nice to see maps, it would be nice to see different maps in this. Not necessarily different maps, because I think the layouts of the maps were fine. It's just that the actual maps themselves seemed very dull and kind of bland. They needed to be more dressed up. There needed to be more gore and horror stuff going on. There needed to be more chaos going on in the maps that we had, because some of the maps, especially like the city map, just look like a normal city with like the exception of a crashed cop car, which is like, that doesn't even look all that weird in the city. It's like there should be a whole lot of crazy stuff going on in the cities and stuff. The 3 maps we got weren't all of the maps, because they said there was going to be 7 maps, so those other ones might have been a little bit better. If they were basically the same, then that would have been rather disappointing. I don't think the actual map layouts themselves were necessarily bad, though. I think the maps played fine for the ones that we did have there. There was usually places to loop, there was usually enough of the map that you could kind of run around, there was ways to where you could kind of break off or be cornered off by Zeds from the team, there was ways where, or places where your teammates could set up, and with some of the new movement mechanics that they had in the game, that does make that a lot more difficult to add in, rather than something like we had in Killing Floor 2. But they did make the Zeds have potentially more movement as well, like the Husks. I actually really liked how they could climb on top of stuff and be shooting down at you. It made it so you weren't always just looking down like the same 2 or 3 corridors like you would in Killing Floor 2. You would usually be kind of scanning around the area. So I think that's fine. I think the maps were an okay template, but not really altogether working. And then the last part of the problems, at least that I can think of at the moment, is like the UI. The UI didn't look way great. It didn't look terrible in my opinion, because honestly I didn't pay very much attention to it, but it could be changed to be a bit better. I actually seen somebody's footage, I don't remember who, but it just had like the overlay of the original Killing Floor on there. And the original overlay of Killing Floor looks a lot better on the more modern one, at least on Killing Floor 3, than what we had in Killing Floor 3. So yeah, it's something like that would work just fine. The Killing Floor 2 layout was fine too. I don't think anybody had a problem with that. So just something that's a regular UI, something that doesn't have a bunch of stuff on it, that's not really distracting, that just looks like a standard UI. Put, you know, just little numbers anywhere and then make it so you can scale it up or down. That way it's either out of the way and you don't have to worry about it, or if you really want to see it, you can scale up the size and actually see what's all being shown there. So now that we went over all the negatives, let's talk about some of the good things that were in Killing Floor 3, because I don't want this to all just feel like it's negatives. I think there was some pretty good stuff in there. The movement, I think, doesn't really need to change, just smooth it out more, make it so the animations play a little bit nicer, because I did actually like all the movement that you got in Killing Floor 3, the dash to be able to dodge stuff, the slides, I liked that as well, so you could dodge things or potentially just slide around corners and stuff. It felt kind of nice. I enjoyed that sort of movement in games, so I don't really have a problem with that. That one's going to be like a personal preference thing, but honestly I think it was fine. The weapon upgrade system I think is nothing but a bonus to the game. Makes it so you can actually customize your weapons and change them up quite a bit differently. I don't see why that one would really need to change. Honestly, you could just even add more stuff to it. More things that you could put on your weapons. Even if there's not very many weapons, I would rather have weapons that I can customize heavily rather than a bunch of weapons, especially when you get a bunch of weapons and they all kind of feel samey. There was problems with that in like Killing Floor 2. Especially towards the end of Killing Floor 2 when it's like we get the same type of gun, but it does something that's either slightly better or worse than an already existing gun. Skill trees were another good bonus to this because the skill trees in KF2 are extremely lacking, where it's just pick left or right, that's it. You don't really have any other choice, so there's not a whole lot of build variety in the game. I like having more build variety in the games, both in weapons and in character builds, so that you can customize things to your own liking. Whatever works for you, I think that one is definitely a bonus. Even though it did seem like some of the skill trees were pretty strong. Like some of the abilities seemed really strong in Killing Floor 3, so they might still need to be balanced, but I do like the idea of a skill tree that you can build up. The last bonus to Killing Floor 3 that I'd like to talk about is the crossplay and some of the quality of life bonuses, like the being able to trade Dosh at the trader to other players directly. That way you don't have to toss it on the ground and other people have to collect it and actually use it. So I do really enjoy that, as well as there's crossplay in this, which Killing Floor 1 and 2 did not have. Which, I mean, crossplay is nothing but a bonus for most of the player base, I would say, because not everybody's going to be playing on the same system, especially if you have friends that play on console and you play on PC or vice versa. At least this way, then people can play together, which is always going to be more of a bonus. So, TLDR, yeah, I hope Killing Floor turns out really good. I hope Killing Floor 3 gets better. I hope that they start listening to the community and start taking on at least the major things that the community wants. Like, nobody wanted specialists. Everybody wants weapons that look and sound good. Those type of things. Those would be best. Oh, also performance. I didn't talk about performance, but I didn't have really that many performance issues. It worked okay enough for me. I'm not going to say it worked perfectly. I did say that in the previous video, and it's like, well, it worked perfectly enough for like an early access beta as to what I was expecting. But having something that does function is obviously going to be better than it not functioning. So tell me your thoughts on Killing Floor 3. What do you think about it being pushed back to, well, sometime in 2025? Do you feel like Tripwire can kind of get their act together and make it into a good game like Killing Floor 2? Even though Killing Floor 2 had problems on release too, but either way, thank you guys so very much for watching this. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye, everybody!